Welcome back, lovely ladies. If you want to become the woman of your dreams, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. And join our Patreon for even more exclusive content. Now, let's dive into today's story.
Mason was almost 23 when the trunk first arrived at his apartment. It was a dusty, worn thing with rusted metal clasps and corners that looked as if they had been dropped one too many times. The delivery people struggled with it a bit, huffing as they maneuvered it through the narrow hallway leading to his living room. Once they left, Mason stood there, gazing at the trunk in silence. It was the last tangible keepsake from his grandmother, who had passed away just weeks before. Even as he remembered her warmth, those swirling memories brought a tinge of sadness, because her house, where he had spent so many summers, felt alive in his mind, but was now shuttered and sold. He dragged the trunk to the center of the living room, took a seat on the couch, and rested his elbows on his knees. He thought about how he had been told of an inheritance, but he never guessed it would come in the form of this old trunk. He had assumed there might be a small sum of money or a modest piece of jewelry. Instead, there was something far more personal. Gazing at its weather-beaten surface, he recognized some of the stickers that had been there since before he was born. Little images of travel destinations his grandmother had once visited, or so she had claimed. Italy, France, even places around the United States. She used to tell him stories of her adventures. He sighed, running a hand through his short brown hair. He was tall, well-built from occasional jogging and the morning workouts he did to clear his mind. His grandmother used to joke that he was far too lanky and active for her comfort, forever leaping onto counters to get the cookie jar. Though she had doted on him, she never stopped him from being who he was, even in small ways. She always let him rummage through her bedroom closet when he was younger, letting him explore her collection of scarves, hats, and jewelry. He would twirl and preen in front of the big mirror beside her vanity while she clapped and laughed. Most people in his family had never known about those moments. She had kept that private world of imagination alive for him, and he had adored her for it. He reached for the clasps, heart beating faster than it should have for something as simple as opening a trunk. He realized in that moment that he was afraid of memories, or perhaps of regrets. But he pushed forward. He flipped the clasps, each giving a metallic click. The trunk groaned open. Inside, he saw layers of meticulously stacked letters, old photographs, and stacks of recipe cards. Some postcards fluttered to the side. There was a swirl of nostalgia in the air, as if his grandmother's gentle perfume still lingered, comforting him from beyond. He lifted the top bundle of letters. Many appeared to be written in his grandmother's steady cursive, addressed to various friends and relatives. She wrote birthday greetings, holiday wishes, even short notes about daily life. Neat handwriting covered the envelopes, each carefully marked by date and name. Mason recognized some addresses: old neighbors, distant cousins, long-lost acquaintances he had heard about but never met. A pang of longing cut through him. He wished he could sit down with his grandmother again in her kitchen, sipping tea and hearing her regale him with tales of each person. He set aside the letters, sorting them by date. Beneath the letters, he found a small box containing jewelry. He paused and lifted a delicate necklace. He remembered her wearing it every Sunday. Memories of her reading by the fireplace, leaning over him to tuck him in at night, or hugging him tight whenever he was leaving her home came flooding back. The weight of her absence felt heavier. Suddenly, something caught his attention. A white envelope, carefully closed, but with his name written in a flowing script across the front. Mason hesitated, feeling an inexplicable rush of emotions: curiosity, excitement, and an inexplicable tremor of fear. He took a long breath and opened it. "My darling," It said at the top in a voice that he almost imagined hearing in his ear, "If you are reading this, it means I am gone from this world, but know that I will always be close. Wear the life that fits you, my darling." Mason's eyes stung with tears. His grandmother was the only person in his childhood who had never once reproached him for his curiosity regarding her closet and accessories. He remembered being 5 or 6, parading around in a sun hat and swirl of bright scarves while she applauded from a nearby armchair. She had never laughed at him cruelly. Instead, she let him be. As he grew older, he felt the tension from other family members who began to suspect that he would be judged or teased by the neighborhood kids. But Grandma, she had been the one constant figure of warmth. He felt as though time had bent back on itself, and he was that boy again, spinning in front of the mirror as she smiled. "Wear the life that fits you," she had written. He reread the line, hearing her gentle voice urging him forward with those words. The memory of her soft laughter made his heart tighten. He set the letter down and closed his eyes. He recalled an incident when he was around 11. He had been at her house for the weekend. She had served a wonderful dinner of roast chicken and mashed potatoes. Afterward, while she was washing dishes, he snuck into her bedroom. He found a bright red scarf and some long beaded necklaces that shimmered. He started draping them across himself, seeing how they fell on his narrow shoulders, imagining what it would feel like to have no fears about what he wore in public. There had been such joy. Grandma found him and just whispered, "Looking good, little one." She never reproached him. That gentle hush of encouragement sank deep in his bones. Now, with the trunk open and the letter in hand, he felt something lift inside him. Over the years, guilt and shame had grown more pronounced, fed by worried relatives' comments and the unpredictability of small-town rumors. He had never truly let himself see that side of him since he was a teenager. It was as though those colorful scarves and hats had been locked away in a dusty part of his memory. Yet here was his grandmother, even in death, giving him permission. No, more than permission, insisting he not run away from it anymore. Steeling himself, he dug further into the trunk. Tucked beneath a stack of letters was a neatly folded dress. His heart pounded with an energy that was both elation and anxiety. He set the dress aside for a moment. It was vintage, a deep navy color with small floral patterns. He could practically see his grandmother wearing it with her wide-brimmed hat on a sunny afternoon in her garden. He held it against himself, noticing its shape. He wasn't sure if it would fit, but he could imagine that if he slipped it on, he would remember everything about her. He debated whether to try it on immediately or to wait. His small apartment in the city was a far cry from Grandma's old house in the countryside, so full of nooks and corners that made him feel safe. Here, his windows faced a crowded street. A neighbor across the way liked to keep the curtains open. He wasn't sure if he was ready to let anyone see him like this, especially since he had kept this hidden for so long. But those words on the page, "Wear the life that fits you," kept echoing in his mind. He walked to his bedroom and locked the door, just in case. He set the vintage dress on the edge of his bed. Slowly, carefully, he removed his jeans and shirt, taking an extra moment to observe himself in the tall mirror by the closet. He was still that tall, broad-shouldered person he'd grown into, a little scruff on his chin from forgetting to shave earlier that week. He took the dress in his hands, feeling the texture of the fabric. It smelled faintly of old perfume, or maybe that was his imagination. He slipped it over his head. It didn't fit perfectly. He had to tug at the waist and adjust the sleeves, but as soon as it settled on his body, he felt warmth. In his mind, he saw glimpses of his grandmother's kitchen, the windy yard where he would run around, the living room where he would dance with scarves. The gentle hum of memory replaced his anxiety. There was no more sense of being absurd or out of place. Instead, it was as if her arms were around him, telling him everything was all right. He turned to the mirror, resting his hands at his sides, and let out a trembling breath. He stood that way for several minutes, just looking, just feeling. His pulse steadied, though every so often he would feel a twitch of nerves flutter in his stomach. He realized that in all those years of locking this part of himself away, he had never experienced such a sense of calm in those quiet minutes. The guilt he once felt had been replaced by something gentle, like the hush of a breeze through an open window. He allowed himself that moment. A sudden buzzing of his phone made him jump. It took him a second to realize where the phone was, on the dresser, and the abrupt noise jolted him from his reverie. He almost tripped trying to get there, still not used to wearing a garment that hung differently from his usual pants and t-shirts. Catching himself, he snatched up the phone. It was his mother calling. "Mason, sweetie, how are you?" came her familiar voice the moment he answered. He pressed the phone to his ear, still wearing the dress. "I'm good, Mom. Just busy," he said, attempting to steady his voice. He wondered what she would say if she saw him right now. She had never been as openly supportive of his childhood dress-up sessions as Grandma had been. She tried to be kind in general, but he knew she believed in a more rigid definition of clothing choices. The thought made him tense. "I just wanted to check on you," she continued. "I know your grandmother meant a lot, and I remember you got that trunk today. Have you looked inside yet?" He paused. He felt the soft weight of the dress on his shoulders. "Yeah, I did. Lots of letters, some old photos, a few interesting things," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Your grandmother always had a treasure trove of memories. If you find anything important, let me know. She wrote a lot of letters she never sent, some recipes too. You might get a kick out of them." He hummed in acknowledgement, glancing at his reflection in the mirror. "I will. Thanks, Mom." She hesitated. "You sound a bit off. Are you sure everything's all right?" "Just feeling nostalgic, I guess," he said, forcing a small laugh. "It's a lot to take in." She exhaled gently. "I understand. Anyway, I'm here if you need me. Come by for dinner sometime this week, all right?" "Sure thing. Thanks for calling, Mom," he said, ending the call quickly. The conversation had left him unsettled, though not entirely in a bad way. It was just the feeling of how different his mother's approach was from Grandma's. It struck him that he had never truly given her a chance to understand what he was going through. Yet at the same time, he felt protective over this aspect of himself, not wanting to expose it to potential judgment. He took off the dress, carefully folding it and placing it back in the trunk for the time being. He spent the rest of the evening sorting through letters, some of which were incredibly old. A photograph of Grandma standing in a city plaza with a group of friends made him smile. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, her posture confident and elegant. He remembered her telling him that sometimes clothes were not just clothes. They were statements, reflections of one's heart. Mason felt that something new had ignited within him, or maybe something old had just resurfaced. He was determined to see where it led, even if it meant challenging everything he had been told about what was proper. He reread the note one more time before going to bed. "Wear the life that fits you, my darling." That single line was a beacon guiding him forward. The next day, Mason woke up with a sense of purpose. He found himself distracted at work, where he held a job in a small marketing firm. His mind kept drifting back to the trunk, to the dress, to that gentle encouragement in his grandmother's words. By the time he clocked out, he felt an urge to explore clothing stores he had always hesitated to enter. Normally, he would walk right past boutiques with flashy window displays, focusing on the standard men's section of a department store if he needed new clothes. That day, he paused outside a small vintage shop he'd walked by many times but never ventured into. The window showcased mannequins in decades-old apparel, polka-dot dresses, high-waisted trousers, and bold accessories from different eras. The store had the vibe of a hidden treasure trove, much like his grandmother's trunk. He inhaled, ignoring the jittery feeling in his stomach, and stepped inside. A tiny bell tinkled above him. The shop was smaller than he'd expected, racks of colorful garments forming a kaleidoscope. He could smell the faint perfume of old fabric, mixed with the sharp scent of cleaning solutions. A sales associate, a woman with a kind smile, approached. "Hello, can I help you find anything?" she asked. Mason's heart hammered in his chest. He wasn't even sure what to say. He thought about lying, saying he was looking for a gift for someone else, but the memory of Grandma's note gave him just enough courage to be honest. "I would like to look at some vintage dresses," he murmured, hoping his voice wouldn't shake. The woman's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded pleasantly. "We have a lovely selection just this way. Anything in particular?" He swallowed. "Nothing specific. Something around, well, my size," he said with an awkward laugh. She nodded without a hint of judgment. "Let's see what we have. We cater to a lot of theater folks and collectors, so I'm sure we can find something that might fit." He followed her through the aisles. She showed him several dresses, from flapper-style pieces to more modern prints. He tried to gauge the cuts and fabrics. Eventually, she pulled out a simple navy dress with small floral accents. It had a slightly cinched waist. Looking at it, he felt a jolt of recognition. It reminded him of the one in his grandmother's trunk. Mason took it and moved toward the dressing room, though his nerves were practically roaring now. He looked at the sales associate. "Is it all right if I try this on?" She nodded, gesturing to the fitting rooms in the back. "Take your time," she said. "Just let me know if you need any help." Once he was alone in the narrow curtained booth, he slipped off his jacket and jeans, carefully easing the dress over his head. It was snug across his shoulders, but not uncomfortably so. He managed to smooth it down, seeing how it fell just below his knees. Turning to the mirror, he felt that same wave of emotional resonance he had experienced in his bedroom. There was an elegance in the fabric's flow, and the pattern brought him right back to those afternoons spent rummaging through Grandma's closet. "Okay, you good in there?" came the associate's voice from the other side of the curtain. Mason took a moment to steady himself. "Yes," he said, stepping out. He felt his cheeks flush. A part of him wanted to shrink from her gaze, but she looked at him with genuine consideration, tilting her head as if to see the fit more clearly. "That color suits you," she said. "You've got a nice frame for vintage cuts. Some of them can look off on certain body types, but this one's not too bad." He managed a small smile, both embarrassed and strangely touched. "I really like it," he said, turning to look in the mirror that stood at the end of the hall. A wave of emotion rose inside him again. This time it felt more like relief and a sense of closeness to his grandmother's memory. He bought the dress, ignoring the gnawing worry about whether or not he should. That evening, once he was home, he dug back into the trunk to see if there were any accessories that might go with it. He found a pair of gloves that had probably seen better days, but they were still beautiful in a quaint, old-fashioned way. He also uncovered a small pouch of costume jewelry. He brushed his fingers over a bracelet that jangled delicately. Then, the letter from Grandma slid off a stack of photos and practically demanded his attention again. He read her words, and the sense of belonging returned. He placed the letter aside carefully. In the days that followed, he began wearing the vintage dress at home in the evenings. He would draw the blinds to maintain some privacy, but each time he put it on, it felt like a step further into the realm his grandmother had encouraged him to explore. He realized that cross-dressing had always appealed to him in a deeply personal way, not as a mere whim. It was something about the expression, the freedom, the sense that he could honor a part of himself he had long silenced. He was still nervous, still uncertain how the world would react if they saw him, but he could almost hear Grandma's voice saying that it didn't matter as much as he thought. One Saturday afternoon, as he was flipping through the trunk's contents, there was a knock at his door. He froze, remembering he was wearing a sleeveless floral dress he had bought at the vintage shop. He tossed a cardigan on over it, heart pounding. Then he moved to the door. He checked the peephole. His friend Aaron, who had texted him earlier about dropping by. "Mason, you home?" Aaron called, knocking a second time. They had been friends since college, and while he trusted her more than most people, he had still never discussed his interest in wearing dresses. He hesitated, thinking about dashing into his bedroom to change, but he realized that running would only reinforce his own fear. So, with his hand shaking slightly, he opened the door a crack and faced her. "Mason, hey," she started, but paused, taking in the sight of him. He pushed the door open wider, letting her see the cardigan and the floral pattern beneath. Her eyes flicked to the outfit for a moment before meeting his gaze. She swallowed, stepping inside. "Well, hi," she managed, her voice gentle. "Is this a new look for you? I like it." Mason felt the tightness in his chest loosen a bit at her quiet acceptance. That word like echoed in his ears. "It's something I've been exploring," he said, carefully closing the door behind her. He searched her expression for any hint of judgment, but she simply looked curious and kind. She slipped her shoes off and placed her purse on a chair. "You look nice, and I mean that," she gestured to the trunk. "Is that your grandmother's trunk?" He nodded, guiding her inside. "Yes, she left it for me. It's full of letters, recipes, old photos, and a note for me, specifically." Aaron's eyes softened. "Your grandmother was really wonderful. I only met her a few times, but she seemed very open-minded and loving." He led her to the living room, where the trunk lay open on the floor. He carefully picked up the letter and handed it to her. "She wrote this. It kind of set me free in a sense," he explained, catching himself. He had nearly used a word that might have sounded too casual or trivial, but it captured what he felt. Aaron read it silently, nodding slowly as she reached the crucial line. "That's beautiful," she said softly, returning it to him. "So you felt this was what you needed all along?" He nodded. "I've always had this interest from childhood. She never stopped me. She encouraged me in her gentle way, but I never felt comfortable letting that part of me show. Not really. Now it's different." Aaron placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm glad you feel safe enough to do it. Are you worried about how your mom or dad would react?" He exhaled slowly. "Yes, my dad, especially. He's got this very traditional view of how I should live. I've always tried to be the version of myself that he wanted. It never sat quite right. But I did it. And Mom, well, she's kind, but I don't know how she'd respond if she walked in and saw me like this. She's never encouraged me, though she's not really cruel or anything." Aaron pulled him into a brief, reassuring hug. "I'm here for you. And if you ever decide to talk to your parents about it, let me know how I can support you." Tears pricked at Mason's eyes, but he willed them back. He was grateful for her kindness. They spent the rest of the afternoon going through the trunk, reading some of Grandma's older letters. Many referenced her youth, describing nights out dancing, dinners with friends, and occasional troubles she faced. Her voice in those letters was playful and wise at the same time. Aaron carefully pulled out a photograph of his grandmother in a pale green dress. "She was such a classic beauty," she commented. "I can see where you got your style." Mason laughed softly, holding another photo up to the light. She always said we looked alike, especially around the eyes. I never really believed her until I saw these old pictures. Before Erin left that day, she turned at the doorway and said, "You look comfortable and confident in those clothes. You should keep doing whatever makes you happy." Mason locked the door behind her, feeling a deep surge of relief at having shown someone else this aspect of himself. He realized he had been tensing his entire body all day, ready for judgment, and now he could exhale. That night, he cooked dinner while still wearing the floral dress, music drifting from his speakers, everything feeling just a little lighter. Over the next few weeks, Mason's small apartment became a refuge for him. He alternated between his usual jeans and t-shirts when he went out or to work, but the moment he got home, he changed into either his grandmother's vintage clothes or the few vintage dresses he had purchased himself. He felt a sense of wholeness in those moments, though he was careful not to let the neighbors catch a glimpse through the windows. Now and then, he caught himself pausing before the mirror, simply observing, letting the reflections sink in. He imagined his grandmother seated in an armchair, smiling at him. Eventually, the time came for him to visit his parents for dinner, as his mom had requested. He considered not wearing anything too revealing of his new passion, not wanting to stir controversy. But as he rummaged through his closet, he spotted a long-sleeved shirt that had a softer, flowy look and seemed a bit more in line with the style he had grown fond of. It wasn't flashy, and it was neutral enough that it might not cause an immediate outburst. But it was the first time he was deliberately choosing something that leaned toward that side of him when visiting family. He paired it with slim jeans, trying to hold on to his newfound sense of confidence. Even that small shift felt like a symbolic step forward. His parents' house was still the same, a modest home with a neat front yard, wind chimes on the porch, and the faint smell of pot roast drifting from the open windows. When his mother opened the door, she gave him a quick hug and ushered him inside. The living room looked exactly as it always had, with carefully arranged family photos on the walls. He noticed his dad sitting in an armchair, flipping through the channels on TV. His mother commented, "That's a different type of shirt for you. Looks nice." There was something cautious in her tone, but not disapproving. He forced a smile, heart pounding. "I've been trying new styles lately," he said. Before she could respond, his dad glanced over. "Hey, Mason," his father said, standing up. His gaze flicked over Mason's outfit. He nodded stiffly. "Dinner's almost ready. You hungry?" "Yeah, I am," Mason replied, swallowing. He couldn't quite read his father's expression, but no comment followed about the shirt. That alone was a relief. Conversation centered on general topics: work, errands, local weather. His mother occasionally glanced at him, her eyes lingering on the cut of the top he wore. But still, she said nothing, though she looked thoughtful. At one point during dinner, his father asked if he'd received everything from Grandma's inheritance. Mason mentioned the trunk and the letters, skipping over the details that truly mattered. After they finished eating, Mason's mother asked if he wanted tea or coffee. He accepted tea, and she led him into the kitchen. Away from his father's earshot, she leaned in and asked, "Mason, are you sure you're doing all right?" He mustered up a gentle laugh, trying to break the tension. "Mom, I promise I'm fine." She studied him for a moment. "You seem different. I can't put my finger on it, but maybe more at ease with yourself in some way." He wondered if he should open the floodgates of conversation here, but he couldn't do it yet. He just smiled softly. "I've just been reflecting on a lot of things Grandma used to tell me. She was never one to be bothered by what people thought. I guess her letters are rubbing off on me." His mother's shoulders relaxed a fraction. "I see. Well, she was always wise, and I'm glad you're taking good things from her." She reached for a stack of mugs. "If there's ever anything you want to talk about, I'll listen." He nodded. letting a small wave of gratitude settle in. "Thank you," he said simply. They returned to the living room with tea, and the conversation drifted to lighter topics. That night, as he left his parents' house, he felt a cautious optimism. No harsh words, no confrontation, just an unspoken sense that his mother recognized something shifting in him. Part of him was still terrified of telling them everything, but another part remembered how Aaron had responded. Perhaps not everyone would react with hostility. The trunk's presence back at his apartment, with all its letters, felt like a steady reminder of that possibility. Time passed. Mason's routine grew more fluid. He wore the clothes he preferred at home, and even occasionally in public, though typically in places he didn't expect to run into his parents' social circle or his co-workers. He discovered new ways of blending what was traditionally labeled as masculine and feminine, so that sometimes people hardly noticed. Other times, a curious glance or two would follow him on the street, but no one said anything unkind. Most people simply minded their own business. One day he was invited to a small gathering by some colleagues. It was a casual meet-up at someone's apartment with music, drinks, and conversation. He decided, on an impulse, that he would wear a comfortable knee-length vintage skirt he had found at a thrift shop, paired with a sweater. He felt anxious the entire way there, expecting stares and hushed whispers. But the moment he entered, people greeted him warmly. A few eyes lingered, but overall, no one treated him like an outcast. A coworker asked if his skirt was vintage, and he nodded, receiving a friendly compliment. Later that evening, standing on the balcony with a plastic cup of soda in hand, a coworker named Antonio came up to him and said, "I like what you're wearing. You've got a great sense of style." Mason's cheeks warmed. "Thanks," he said, surprised by the lack of judgment in Antonio's tone. Antonio shrugged, leaning against the balcony railing. "I did some modeling in college. People used to fuss about clothes and presentation all the time. I realized how arbitrary it can be. If it looks good, it looks good." Mason felt a small weight lift off his shoulders. He started to understand that maybe the reservations had been more in his mind than anywhere else. Sure, not everyone would be accepting, but he was learning that many might just be fine with it. He spent the rest of the evening chatting freely, occasionally forgetting his worries altogether. At home later that night, he pulled out the trunk again, searching for any letter he might have missed. He found one he hadn't yet read, written to an old friend. It spoke of the same gentle perseverance that had guided her all her life. She mentioned how people in her youth sometimes gossiped about her because she wore flamboyant outfits. In the letter, she said it never stopped her. She ended it with a line that echoed in Mason's mind long after he had drifted to sleep. "To deny yourself is the worst kind of sorrow." Not long afterward, Aaron invited him out for coffee, wanting to hear more about his progress in exploring his wardrobe. They sat in a cozy corner of a small cafe, sipping warm drinks while the chatter of other customers buzzed around them. Mason wore a pair of burgundy pants that had a subtle flare, paired with an oversized sweater that had embroidered flowers on the sleeves. Aaron was the first to speak after they settled into their seats. "You look wonderful," she said with a grin. "How have you been feeling about everything? Are you still worried about telling your parents?" He sighed, stirring his coffee. Less worried than before, but still not entirely sure how to bring it up. My mom seemed suspicious but not upset. Dad has barely noticed, or if he has, he doesn't comment. Maybe he doesn't know what to say. Aaron shrugged sympathetically. "It might come up naturally, or you might have to be direct. But whenever that happens, you know you aren't alone." Mason smiled softly. "Thank you for being such a good friend. This means a lot to me. Grandma was my #1 support for so long. Now that she's gone, I was scared I'd have no one." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm here, and there are more people on your side than you realize." He left that cafe feeling a renewed sense of courage. Over the next few days, he rehearsed in his mind how he might bring it up to his parents. But each time he saw his father, the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he continued wearing clothes that made him comfortable, hoping that his father might eventually make a remark that opened the door for a conversation. The trunk, in the meantime, had become a daily ritual. He would open it, read a letter or two, and reflect. He found an old photograph that made him pause. It showed his grandmother in a tailored suit, looking sharply dressed for what appeared to be a formal event. Yet the suit was cut in a way that must have been unusual for a woman of her time. She was standing near a group of men, all wearing standard suits, and she stood out with a flair of individuality. On the back of that photo, in neat handwriting, it read, "Dress codes are sometimes meant to be challenged." A few weeks later, his mother invited him over for lunch. This time, Mason decided it was time to be a bit bolder. He wore a neat, casual shirt with delicate embroidery around the collar and a pair of well-fitted jeans. He braided a small strand of his hair at the side, something he'd never done in front of them. His heart pounded the entire drive over. When he arrived, his mother opened the door, her face registering slight surprise at the braid. Yet she said nothing negative, just a polite, "Come on in, I made sandwiches." His father was out in the backyard, tinkering with a lawnmower. Mason and his mother sat at the kitchen table, the bright midday sun streaming in through the window. They talked about everyday things for a while. Then, during a lull, she asked, "Are you changing your style these days?" Mason set his sandwich down. "I guess you could say that." She nodded slowly. "It's not a problem. It's just new." He took a breath, deciding to open up. "Mom, do you remember Grandma letting me play in her closet when I was little? She'd let me wear her scarves, hats, sometimes her dresses." She pursed her lips. "I do. It always seemed to make you happy, but I worried you'd be teased." He fiddled with his napkin. "Grandma never worried, though. She always told me to do what felt right. And recently I read a note she left for me in the trunk. It reminded me that I shouldn't keep hiding who I am." His mother's eyes misted slightly. "I know how loving she was. I also know the world can be harsh." He nodded, heart pounding. "I'm done letting that fear run everything, though. It's been exhausting. I don't want to come home every day and feel like I'm pretending." Silence stretched between them. Finally, she reached over and touched his hand. "Mason, I'm your mother. I might need some time to fully understand, but I do see how important this is. And I don't want to hurt you. You're my child. Nothing will change that. I just hope you know some people might not understand." He gave her a small, grateful smile. "I'm aware. But that doesn't change my decision. And I hope Dad will be okay with me too." Her mouth drew into a thin line, but she nodded. "You'll have to talk to him, but I'll stand by you." Emboldened by her words, Mason headed out to the backyard, where his father was kneeling by the mower. "Hey, Dad," he said, clearing his throat. "Need a hand?" His father wiped sweat from his forehead and stood up, glancing at Mason's braided hair and embroidered shirt. An unreadable look crossed his face. "Sure, you can hand me that wrench," he said, pointing to the tool on the grass. Mason handed it over, feeling every second stretch. Then he took a breath and decided to speak. "Dad, can we talk for a minute?" His father paused, setting the wrench down. "About what?" Mason swallowed. "I know you've noticed I've been dressing differently. There's more to it. I've been wearing dresses at home, and I feel happier that way. I've always liked it, ever since I was a kid. Grandma was the only one who really understood that." His father's jaw tightened, and for a moment, The only sound was the rustle of a breeze in the hedges. Then he sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry years of worry. "Mason, I don't really know how to handle that. It's not how I pictured you. But you're an adult." He paused. "I can't pretend I get it. And maybe I never will. But I don't want to lose you." The words were stiff, but behind them, Mason sensed genuine concern. He felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. "I'm not trying to make anyone uncomfortable, but I'm also not going to hide it anymore." His father shifted on his feet. "I guess, just do what you need to do. I don't have to like it. But I love you, son, and I won't drive you away. I just might need some space to wrap my head around it." Mason had not expected an instant embrace or unbridled enthusiasm. Yet in his father's awkward acceptance, there was a relief that flooded him. "Thank you," he said, blinking away tears. He realized that might be the best outcome he could hope for in that moment. He offered to help his father with the mower, and they spent a few minutes working side by side, conversation minimal, but tensions easing. Inside, his mother watched them through the kitchen window. When Mason came back in, she asked with a small smile, "Everything all right?" Mason exhaled shakily, nodding. "Better than I thought it'd be." She patted his shoulder. Her eyes were moist with emotion. He realized that he had been bracing for a blow-up for so long that the simple acceptance, however uneasy, felt monumental. He left their house that day feeling as if a weight had finally shifted. That evening, he opened the trunk once more and carefully laid out all of Grandma's letters. He found himself reading her final note again. He could almost feel her presence in the room, humming one of her old tunes. "Wear the life that fits you, my darling." He whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, Grandma." In the weeks that followed, Mason continued to navigate this new terrain. He wasn't parading his wardrobe choices in front of extended family, but he no longer felt he had to hide them completely. Occasionally, he wore a skirt or a dress while shopping, ignoring the few odd glances from strangers. He met up with Erin for lunch wearing a beautiful blouse with lace trim, and she complimented him freely. He visited his parents for dinner again, wearing a more neutral outfit that still had a softer flair, and while his father was subdued, he wasn't hostile. Bit by bit, life became more comfortable. He decided to reorganize his closet. Some of the clothes he had once shoved to the back, the dresses from Grandma's trunk and the few new pieces he'd acquired, he hung up front and center, no longer ashamed. Each morning, he chose what he felt drawn to, rather than what he thought he was supposed to wear. And in that freedom, he discovered a sense of confidence he had never known. One Saturday morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows, Mason sat cross-legged on the floor, a cup of tea beside him, reading through one of Grandma's older letters. She wrote about a time when she defied social norms to pursue a hobby she loved, playing drums in a local band. Some people in her circle frowned on it, but she did it anyway. Mason chuckled at her fierce spirit shining on the page. He glanced at the trunk, feeling a swelling gratitude that she had passed on that spirit to him, tucked into every fold of the dresses, every stroke of her pen. He decided then to create a small shrine of sorts, a space on his bookshelf for the trunk and some of Grandma's pictures, along with a few of her letters displayed in frames. He spent the day arranging photographs, picking which letters to showcase, and designing a spot in his living room that would always remind him of her. By the time he finished, the sun was setting. He gazed at the new arrangement, a tribute to the woman who had taught him so much. He felt her memory there, tangible and loving. As the months rolled on, Mason found little ways to push his boundaries further. He wore a flowy tunic to a company social event and received a mixture of mild curiosity and outright compliments. He posted an online photograph of himself in a vintage dress, though carefully controlling the visibility so that not everyone in his extended family saw it. Some people wrote supportive comments. A few asked questions, but none were hateful. He realized he had underestimated people's capacity for open-mindedness. Occasionally, he still struggled with moments of self-doubt. Sometimes, out on the street, a stranger's pointed stare could make his stomach churn. He learned to meet those stares with a level gaze or a simple smile. More often than not, the strangers would glance away, and life moved on. Through these instances, he felt a part of him growing stronger, more at peace with the choices he made. At home, when he felt shaken by an interaction, he would sit by the trunk, open it, and trace the edges of his grandmother's letters. In a way, he felt he was sharing those moments with her, receiving her unwavering support. Each letter was a testament to a life lived with integrity, whether or not it adhered to others' standards. The trunk itself, battered and worn, reminded him of her journeys, physical and emotional, and how she never let judgment extinguish her light. One night, he had a dream of his grandmother. She stood in her old kitchen, wearing an outfit that was neither obviously feminine nor masculine. She turned to him, smiling that familiar smile, a mix of humor and love in her eyes. In the dream, she didn't say anything. She simply walked over, handed him a scarf, and nodded encouragingly. He awoke with tears on his cheeks. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was the pang of missing her, mixed with gratitude for all she had given him. He rose, walked to the trunk, and found the scarf from his childhood in one of the drawers inside. He tied it around his neck, feeling the soft fabric brush against his skin, and closed his eyes, letting the warmth of her memory envelop him. Later that same day, as he was tidying up, his phone rang. It was his mom. He answered, and after exchanging greetings, she cleared her throat. "You know, I was thinking, you've been talking about Grandma's trunk so much. Would you mind if I came by and saw what's in it?" Mason paused, heart speeding up. "I'd like that," he said honestly. He recognized this as a chance to bridge the gap that remained, to share with his mother an aspect of his life he once kept secret. When she arrived that afternoon, Mason had the trunk open and ready, the letters neatly organized. He hesitated for a moment before deciding to wear one of the simpler vintage dresses, layering a cardigan over it. It felt right to honor Grandma's spirit in that way. His mother stepped in, eyes flicking over his attire. She pressed her lips together for a moment, but then gave him a tentative smile. She knelt beside the trunk, lifting a letter. "Oh, this is from when she visited France in her 20s, she murmured. "I remember her telling me how she danced with strangers all night." She laughed softly, then looked at Mason. She really was one of a kind. They spent the next hour going through letters and photos. Occasionally, Mason's mother would tear up, missing her mother. Other times, she'd laugh at a wry comment or story. Eventually, she came across the small box of jewelry. She picked up the necklace that Mason had first discovered. "I remember her wearing this every Sunday. She used to say it brought her luck." She held it out to him. "I think you should keep it." Mason accepted it, his voice unsteady. "Thank you, Mom." She studied him, glancing at the dress. "It suits you, in a way. The style, I mean." He felt a wave of emotion surge. "It makes me feel like I'm holding on to her, like part of her is still here." His mother's eyes grew misty. She placed a hand on his arm. "I guess you are, and I think she'd be proud of you." They shared a quiet moment, and Mason felt the final remnants of his old fear loosen their hold. Perhaps not everything was perfect, but it was better than he had dared hope. By the time his mother left that evening, they had forged a deeper understanding of each other, however imperfect it might be. That night, he held the necklace in his palm, reflecting on how everything had changed since the trunk arrived. He no longer felt weighed down by secrets. He remembered the swirl of guilt he once felt about his childhood longing to dress in feminine clothes. Now, that shame felt distant, replaced by a calm sense of belonging in his own skin. In the quiet of his apartment, he allowed himself a moment of gratitude that even though Grandma was gone, her love still resonated in every stitch, every photograph, every word she had written. He moved to the mirror and placed the necklace around his neck. It fell softly at his collarbone, catching the light. The vintage dress he wore flowed gently around him, and in the reflection, he saw a person who no longer flinched at his own image. He might still face difficult days, but in that moment, he felt a closeness to his grandmother's spirit that gave him the courage to keep going. He whispered a soft goodnight to the trunk and the countless letters it contained. He would read them many times over in the coming years, discovering new nuances and lessons in her words. The trunk, once just a piece of old luggage, had become a portal to a deeper, cherished truth. And that single sentence in the note, "Wear the life that fits you, my darling," stayed with him, guiding him like a gentle lighthouse in every choice he made. In the end, Mason understood that real love, the kind that breathes through generations, does not vanish when someone is gone. It lingers in letters, in memories, in the vintage fabric of a dress that used to belong to someone who saw him for who he was. It dwells in the corners of a room, the whiff of perfume that seems to appear when he needs reassurance. It appears in the eyes of a supportive friend like Aaron, or in the hesitant kindness of a parent who is trying to grasp something new. That was how Grandma's legacy lived on, weaving itself into every thread of his journey. And though there were days when the world felt sharp, Mason carried in his heart that unbreakable sense of belonging, stitched into place by the unconditional warmth she had shown him from the very start.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.